The Rocky Road to Nationhood. Made possible with the generous, community-minded support of American Public University system. More at civilwarscholars.com. A video on YouTube and a post at Civil War Scholars match this content. This two-part video shows image credits and audio credits, and in a second video, sources and references as they are used or appear in the order in the video. This video shows an order of the narrative of the Rocky Road video, sources of information. Very similar content is provided at Civil War Scholars as posts and at the public Flickr.com account of Jim Surkamp under Rocky Road to Nationhood. Number 1, James Rumsey, 1743 to 1792, inventor of steam technologies and operator with Robert Throckmorton of a new boarding house at the sign of the Liberty Pole and flag. Number 2, George Washington lodged at the boarding house and saw Rumsey's boat invention. Number 3, the boat actually consisted of two boats with a paddle wheel mounted between them. As the wheel turned with the current, it operated poles that were supposed to push against the river bottom, making the vessel walk upstream. Number 4, before leaving Bath, George Washington gave Rumsey a certificate attesting to the potential value of the invention and his faith in its ultimate success. The discovery is of vast importance, may be of the greatest usefulness in our inland navigation, and if it succeeds, of which I have no doubt. Number 5, in July 1785, Rumsey was recommended by Washington and appointed the superintendent of the newly formed Potomac Company to oversee the clearing of rocks at what is now Harper's Ferry. For a year, Rumsey oversaw work at the Potomac River site. Meantime, Rumsey had quickly concluded that the pole boat design was too limited and decided to incorporate steam propulsion into his design. Number 6, Steamboat Experiments, a chapter in Ella May Turner's seminal book, James Rumsey, Steamboat Pioneer. Number 7, a modified full-scale version of the vessel was tried 9 and 13 September 1786 on the Potomac River near Shepherdstown, with little success. The poles slipped on the bottom on the first occasion, and the current was too slow to operate the poles on the second one. Rumsey then abandoned this particular invention, having previously decided on developing a steamboat, a decision that led him in a much more fruitful direction, but involved him in much controversy. Number 8, Rumsey promptly had the certificate published in several prominent newspapers and soon obtained exclusive rights from the legislatures of Virginia, Maryland, and several other states to make and operate his mechanical boat, a necessary step to protect his invention in the absence of any national patent office. Number 9, for a better boiler, Rumsey tried a coil of forged iron pipe, which proved to be both much more efficient and much smaller and lighter. With a functioning steam engine, another problem arose. The single-cylinder pump would draw several gallons of water from beneath the boat and send it down a copper pipe to the stern. Because gallons of water were being drawn into the pump at the same time, as water was still flowing from the pump to the stern, the pump was working against itself. Several strong strokes, and it bound up. 9 continued. This was resolved by replacing the copper pipe with a square wooden trunk with flapper valves in the bottom to allow water in from the river to relieve the negative pressure at the pump. On December 3, 1787, the boat finally made a very successful public demonstration on the Potomac at Shepherdstown. Number 10, in a letter to George Washington. As I wrote you as follows, I have taken the greatest pains to effect another kind of boat upon the principles I was mentioning to you in Richmond. I now have the pleasure to inform you that I have brought it to great perfection. Number 11. The connection between Washington's and Rumsey's early collaborations and reaching nationhood. It was the first in a chain of causally related efforts to make the states work more efficiently together. Number 12. Ron Chernow, recipient of the Pulitzer Prize for his biography of George Washington, wrote, "The plan to extend navigation of the Potomac influenced American history in ways that far transcended the narrow matter of commercial navigation. It created a set of practical problems that could be saved only by cooperation between Virginia and Maryland, setting a pattern for a seminal interstate conference at Annapolis in September 1786, and indeed the Constitutional Convention itself in 1787. Number 13. The law of the land. The Articles of Confederation did not work. The national government could not tax, but only ask states, could not thus fund big infrastructure projects, could not unify state trade rules into one system, could not solve who assumed the war debts. The national government could not fix the Articles without unanimous okay from all states. (14) The Mount Vernon Conference was a meeting of delegates from Virginia and Maryland held March 21st through 28th, 1785, to discuss navigational rights in the state's common waterways. On March 28th, the group drew up a 13-point proposal to govern the two states' rights on the Potomac River, Pocomoke River, and the Chesapeake Bay, known as the Mount Vernon Compact, formerly titled as the Compact of 1785. This agreement not only covered tidewater navigation, but also extended to issues such as toll duties, commercial regulations, fishing rights, and debt collection. Ratified by the legislature of both states, the compact helped set a precedent for later meetings between states for discussions into areas of mutual concern. (15) The proceedings of commissioners to remedy defects of the federal government at Annapolis in the state of Maryland, September 11th through 14th, 1786. 16. The Annapolis Convention was a national political convention held September 11th to the 14th, 1786 at Mann's Tavern in Annapolis, Maryland, in which 12 delegates from 5 states, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Virginia, gathered to discuss and develop a consensus about reversing the protectionist trade barriers that each state had erected. At the time, under the Articles of Confederation, each state was largely independent from the others, and the national government had no authority to regulate trade between and among the states. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and North Carolina had appointed commissioners who failed to arrive in Annapolis in time to attend the meeting, while Connecticut, Maryland, South Carolina, and Georgia had taken no action at all. "17. The Records of the Federal Convention of 1787, 3 volumes, edited by Max Farrand. 18. Houston, James H., 1987, supplement to Max Farrand's The Records of the Federal Convention of 1787. 19. Maryland Journal, February 29, 1788. 20. The Letters of George Washington in the Founders' Archives of the National Archives. 21. Consource.org. 22. Madison James, Jr., 1840, The Papers of James Madison, being his correspondence and reports of debates during the Congress of the Confederation and his reports of debates of the Federal Convention, Volume 3. 23. Warren Charles, 1937, The Making of the Constitution. 24. Find Law for Legal Professionals, The Constitution, Annotations and Amendments. 25. The Constitution of the United States of America, Analysis and Interpretation. Johnny H. Killian and George A. Costello edited the 1992 edition. Killian, Costello, and Kenneth R. Thomas edited the 1996 and 1998 supplements. Costello and Thomas edited the 2000 supplement. 26. Weil, John R., 2005, The Constitutional Convention of 1787, A Comprehensive Encyclopedia of America's Founding, Volume 1. The following statements and thoughts of the delegates at the Constitutional Convention are also available in greater detail at civilwarscholars.com, with links to sources, and at Jim Surkamp's YouTube channel, with image and audio narration making up the video there entitled What They Said at the Constitutional Convention, 1787. 27. Mr. James Wilson, June 6th. I wish for vigor in the government, a sense of the people at large. The Records of the Federal Convention, Volume 1, edited by Max Farrand, page 132. 28. James Madison, June 6th. It was to be inferred then, the rights of the minority are in danger. The Records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 1, edited by Max Farrand, pages 134 and 135. 29. Richard Patterson, June 9th. Let them unite if they please. I had rather submit to a monarch. The Records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 1, edited by Max Farrand, page 172. 30. John Dickinson, June 9th. But we would sooner submit to a foreign power than submit to be deprived of an equality of suffrage in both branches of the legislature. The Records of the Federal Convention, 1787, Volume 1, edited by Max Farrand, page 242, footnote. 31. William Samuel Johnson, Implying Alexander Hamilton, June 21. A gentleman from New York with boldness and decision proposed a system totally different from both the Virginia and New Jersey plans, and though he has been praised by everybody, he has been supported by none. The Records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 1, edited by Max Farrand, page 363. 32. William Davy, in a letter to Richard Carswell, June 19, it is indeed a work of great delicacy and difficulty, impeded at every step by jealousies and jarring interests. Supplement to Max Farrand's The Records of the Federal Convention of 1787, edited by James H. Hudson, page 97. 33. Oliver Ellsworth, using the pseudonym Landholder, on Luther Martin, June 20th. You cannot have forgotten that by such ignorance in politics and contradictory opinions, you exhausted the politeness of the convention, which at length prepared to slumber when you rose to speak. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 3, edited by Max Ferrand, page 272. 34. Gunning Bedford, Jr., June 30. You gravely allege that there is no danger of combination of large states, and triumphantly ask, how could combinations be effected? The larger states, you say, all differ in productions and commerce, and experience shows that instead of combinations, they would be rivals and counteract the views of one another. This, I repeat, is language calculated only to amuse us. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 500. 35. Ben Franklin, June 30th. If a proportional representation takes place, the small states contend that their liberties will be in danger. If an equality of votes is to be put in its place, the large states say their money will be in danger. When a broad table is to be made, and the edges of planks do not fit, the artist takes a little from both and makes a good joint. In like manner here, both sides must part with some of their demands in order that they may join in some accommodating proposition. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 488. 36. Abraham Baldwin. So many things had been so well settled, might refer to the profoundly important vote Baldwin cast that day, an abstention, resulting in a deadlocked 5-5 vote and thus stopping a measure that favored the larger states' goals for their representation to such a great extent that the departure from the convention of the smaller states suddenly became a real possibility. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 510. 37. Eldridge, Giri. If we do not come to some agreement amongst ourselves, some foreign sword will probably do the work for us. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 532. 38. George Washington, July 10th. From George Washington to Alexander Hamilton. I thank you for your communication of the 3rd. When I refer you to the state of the councils which prevailed at the period you left this city, and add that they are now, if possible, in a worse train than ever, you will find but little ground on which the hope of a good establishment can be formed. In a word, I almost despair of seeing a favorable issue to the proceedings of the convention. I'm so sorry you went away. I wish you were back. The crisis equally important and alarming, and no opposition under such circumstances should discourage exertions until the signature is fixed. The Papers of George Washington, the National Archives. 39. Rufus King, July 11th. These considerations, added to the approbation which had already been given to the rule by a majority of the states, induced the convention to agree that direct taxes should be apportioned among the states according to the whole number of free persons and 3/5 of the slaves which they might respectively contain. This inequality in the appointment of all representatives was not misunderstood at the adoption of the Constitution, and has proved to have been the greatest which was made to secure the adoption of the Constitution. Great, however, as this concession was, it was a settlement between the original 13 states and are not applicable to the new states which Congress may now be willing to admit into the Union. Consource.org. 40. John Langdon, July 23rd. The New Hampshire delegate arrives and votes with the bigger states. From the records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 86. 41. Gouverneur Morris, August 8th. Upon what principle is it that the slaves shall be computed in the representation? Are they men? Then make them citizens and let them vote. Are they property? Why then is no other property included? The houses in this city, Philadelphia, are worth more than all the wretched slaves which cover the rice swamps of South Carolina. The admission of slaves into the representation, when fairly explained, comes to this: that the inhabitants of Georgia and South Carolina, who go to the coast of Africa and in defiance of the most sacred laws of humanity, tear away his fellow creatures from their dearest connections and damn them to the most cruel bondages, shall have more votes in a government instituted for the protection of the rights of mankind than the citizens of Pennsylvania or New Jersey, who view this with a laudable horror, so nefarious a practice. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 222. 42. John Rutledge, August 21st. Religion and humanity have nothing to do with this question. Interest alone is the governing principle with nations. The true question at present is whether the Southern states shall or shall not be parties to the Union. If the Northern states consult their interest, they will not oppose the increase of slaves, which will increase the commodities of which they will become the carriers. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 364. 43. Roger Sherman, August 22nd. I am for leaving the clause as it stands. I disapprove of the slave trade. Yet, as the states were not possessed of the right to import slaves, as the public good did not require it to be taken from them, and as it was expedient to have as few objections as possible to the proposed scheme of government, I think it best to leave the matter as we find it. I see that the abolition of slavery seems to be going on in the United States. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 369. 44. George Mason, August 22nd. Maryland and Virginia have already prohibited the importation of slaves expressly. North Carolina had done the same in substance. All this would be in vain if South Carolina and Georgia be at liberty to import. The Western people are already calling out for slaves for their new lands, and will fill that country with slaves if they can be got through South Carolina and Georgia. They bring the judgment of heaven on a country. As nations cannot be rewarded or punished in the next world, they must be in this. By an inevitable chain of causes and effects, Providence punishes national sins by national calamities. The general government should have power to prevent the increase of slavery. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 370. 45. Oliver Ellsworth, August 22nd. Let us not intermeddle. As population increases, poor laborers will be so plenty as to render slaves useless. Slavery in time will not be a speck in our country. Provision is already made in Connecticut for abolishing it, and the abolition has already taken place in Massachusetts. As to the danger of insurrections from foreign influence, that will become a motive to kind treatment of the slaves. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 371. 46. William Samuel Johnson, August 27th. Under the Articles of Confederation, each state was bound by the most solemn obligations to pay its proportion of the national expense. The other states have a right to redress. They have a right by the law of nature and nations to insist upon and compel a performance. How shall this be done? There is no other way but by force of arms. What is the consequence? This way of enforcing federal decrees leads directly to civil war and national ruin. The convention saw this imperfection in attempting to legislate for states, in their political capacity, that the coercion of law can be exercised by nothing but a military force. They have therefore gone upon entirely new ground. They have formed one new nation out of the individual states. The Constitution vests in the general legislature a power to make laws in matters of national concern, to appoint judges to decide upon these laws, and to appoint officers to carry them into execution. This excludes the idea of an armed force. This is the peculiar glory of the Constitution, that it depends upon the mild and equal energy of the magistracy for the execution of the laws. William Samuel Johnson's speech at the Connecticut Ratification Convention, January 4th, 1788. 47. Hugh Williamson, August 28th. In the course of 4 months of severe and painful application and anxiety, the Convention has prepared a plan of government for the United States of America, which we hope will obviate the defects of the present federal union and procure the enlarged purposes which it was intended to effect. We had many things to hope from a national government, and the chief thing we had to fear from such a government was the risk of unequal or heavy taxation. But we hope you will believe as we do that the southern states in general, and North Carolina in particular, are well secured on that head by the proposed system. It is provided that no capitation or other direct tax shall be laid except in proportion to the number of inhabitants, in which number 5 blacks are only counted as 3. If a land tax is laid, we are to pay the same rate. For example, 50 citizens of North Carolina can be taxed no more for all their lands than 50 citizens in one of the eastern states. This must be greatly in our favor, for as most of their farms are small, and many of them live in towns, we certainly have, one with another, land of twice the value that they possess. When it is considered that 5 Negroes are only to be charged the same poll tax as 3 whites, the advantage must be considerably increased under the proposed form of government. The southern states have also a much better security for the return of slaves who might endeavor to escape than they had under the original Confederation. It is not to be supposed that our northern brethren were inattentive to their particular interest. A navigation act, or the power to regulate commerce in the hands of the national government, by which American ships and seamen may be fully employed, is the desirable weight that is thrown into the northern scale. This is what the southern states have given in exchange for the advantages we mentioned above. Delegates William Blount, Richard Speight, and Hugh Williamson to their governor Caswell, September 18, 1787. 48. Edmund Randolph, August 28th. Regards a provision protecting private contracts from laws passed by states by way of a federal Supreme Court with judicial review power. This provision is an essential one because it is promotive of virtue and justice and preventive of injustice and fraud. If we take a review of the calamities which have befallen our reputation as a people, we shall find they have been produced by frequent interferences of the state legislatures with private contracts. If you inspect the great cornerstone of republicanism, you will find it to be justice and honor, a statement given during the Virginia Ratifying Convention in 1788 regards the August 28, 1787 debates. Warren Charles, 1837, The Making of the Constitution, pages 478 and 479. 49. Charlescotesworth, Peckney, August 29th. It is in the true interest of the southern states to have no regulation of commerce, but considering the loss brought on the commerce of the eastern states by the Revolution, their liberal conduct towards the views of South Carolina, and the interest the weak southern states had in being united with the strong eastern states, I think it proper that no fetters should be imposed on the power of making commercial regulations, and that my constituents, though prejudiced against the eastern states, would be reconciled to this liberality. I myself had prejudices against the eastern states before I came here, but would acknowledge that I have found them as liberal and candid as any men whatever. Madison James, Jr., 1840, the papers of James Madison, being his correspondence and reports of debates during the Congress of the Confederation, and his reports of the debates of the Federal Convention, Volume 3, page 1451. 50. Nathaniel Gorham, August 29th. If the government is to be so fettered as to be unable to relieve the eastern states, what motive can they have to join in it, and thereby tie their own hands from measures which they could otherwise take for themselves? The eastern states were not led to strengthen the Union by fear for their own safety. I deprecate the consequences of disunion, but if it should take place, it was the southern part of the continent that had the most reason to dread them. I urge the improbability of a combination against the interest of the southern states, the different situations of the northern and middle states being security against it. It is moreover certain that foreign ships would never be altogether excluded, especially those of nations in treaty with us. The records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, page 453. 51. Pierce Butler, August 29th. I move to insert after Article 15, if any person bound to service or labor in any of the United States shall escape into another state, he or she shall not be discharged from such service or labor in consequence of any regulations subsisting in the state to which they escape, but shall be delivered up to the person justly claiming their service or labor, all of which was agreed to by the Convention. Article 17 being taken up, Mr. Gouverneur Morris moved to strike out the last two sentences, to wit, if the admission be consented to, the new states shall be admitted on the same terms with the original states, but the legislature may make conditions with the new states concerning the public debt, which shall then be subsisting. Morris said, I do not wish to bind down the legislature to admit Western states on the terms here stated. Mr. Madison opposed the motion, insisting that the Western states neither would nor ought to submit to a union which degraded them from an equal rank with the other states. Colonel George Mason said, if it were possible by just means to prevent emigrations to the Western country, it might be a good policy. But go the people will as they find it for their interest, and the best policy is to treat them with that equality which will make them friends, not enemies. The Records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, edited by Max Ferrand, pages 453 and 454. 52. On September 7th, George Mason proposed a Privy Council of 6 members, 2 from each of the nation's geographical sections, which the Senate would choose. Ferrand, Volume 2, page 537. As the convention was considering the current provision for allowing the president to request the opinion of heads of departments in writing, Mason said that, in rejecting a counsel to the president, the convention was about to try an experiment on which the most despotic governments had never ventured. The Grand Signor himself has his divan. In the book by Weil John R., 2005, The Constitutional Convention of 1787, A Comprehensive Encyclopedia of America's Founding, Volume 1, page 196. 53. George Washington to Alexander Hamilton, referring to Washington ending his relationship with George Mason. My dear Sir, Mount Vernon, July 29, 1792. I have not yet received the new regulation of allowances to the surveyors or collectors of the duties of spirituous liquors, but this by the by. My present purpose is to write you a letter on a more interesting and important subject. I shall do it in strict confidence and with frankness and freedom. On my way home, and since my arrival here, I have endeavored to learn from sensible and moderate men, known friends to the government, the sentiments which are entertained of public measures. These all agree that the country is prosperous and happy, but they seem to be alarmed at the system of policy and those interpretations of the Constitution which have taken place in Congress. Others, less friendly perhaps to the government and more disposed to arraign the conduct of its officers, among whom may be classed my neighbor and quondam friend, Colonel M., go further and enumerate a variety of matters, which as well as I can recollect may be adduced under the following heads, viz. First, that the public debt is greater than we can possibly pay before other causes of adding new debt to it will occur, and that this has been artificially created by adding together the whole amount of the debtor and creditor sides of the accounts instead of taking only their balances, which could have been paid off in a short time. From George Washington to Alexander Hamilton, 29 July 1792, Founders Online, National Archives. The Virginia Ratifying Convention, June 1788. Richmond, Virginia. Main sources. 54. Ward, Henry M., 1989. Adams Stephen and the Cause of American Liberty. 55. Tyler Moses C., 1887. Patrick Henry. 56. Wright Robert K., Morris J. McGregor, Jr., 1987, Soldier Statesman of the Constitution. 57. Rutland Robert A., 1981, James Madison and the Search for Nationhood. 58. Cook Roy Bird, January 1952, Western Virginia's Contribution to the Adoption of the Federal Constitution. 59. The U.S. Constitution, the Avalon Project, Documents in Law, History, and Diplomacy. 60. Eliot's Debates, the debates in the several state conventions on the adoption of the Federal Constitution, is a 5-volume collection compiled by Jonathan Eliot in the mid-19th century. The volumes remain the best source for materials about the national government's transitional period between the closing of the Constitutional Convention in September 1787 and the opening of the First Federal Congress in March 1789. On September 17, 1787, the Continental Congress accepted the recommendation of the Constitutional Convention and agreed to distribute the proposed Constitution to the states. Each state was then to elect delegates to a state convention to approve or disapprove the new Constitution. The Constitution would take effect upon ratification by the conventions of 9 of the 13 states. 61. Adam Stephen at the Virginia Ratifying Convention, Monday, June 23, 1788, responding to a speech by Patrick Henry, warning of the instability on the frontier. Mr. Chairman, the gentleman, sir, means to frighten us by his bugbears of hobgoblins, his sale of lands to pay taxes, Indian purchases, and other horrors that I think I know as much about as he does. I have traveled through the greater part of the Indian countries. I know them well, sir. I can mention a variety of resources by which the people may be enabled to pay their taxes. I know, Mr. Chairman, of several rich mines of gold and silver in the western country, and will a gentleman tell me that these precious metals will not pay taxes? If the gentleman does not like this government, let him go and live among the Indians. I know of several nations that live very happily, and I can furnish him with a vocabulary of their language. American Memory, the Library of Congress, Eliot's Debates, page 580. 62. Adam Stephen at the Virginia Convention, June 25, 1788, near the final vote, strongly urging aye votes. Mr. Stephen addressed the chairman, but in so low a voice that he could not be distinctly heard. He described in a feeling manner the unhappy situation of the country, and the absolute necessity of preventing a dismemberment of the Confederacy. I was, said he, sent hither to adopt the Constitution as it is. But such is my regard for my fellow citizens that I would concur in their amendments. The gentlemen on the other side have adduced no reasons or proofs to convince us that the amendments should become a part of the system before ratification. What reason have we to suspect that persons who are chosen from among ourselves will not agree to the introduction of such amendments as will be desired by the people at large? In all safe and free governments, there ought to be a judicious mixture in the 3 different kinds of government. This government is a compound of those different kinds. But the democratic kind preponderates, as it ought to do. The members of one branch are immediately chosen by the people, and the people also elect in a secondary degree the members of the other 2. At present, we have no Confederate government. It exists but in name. The honorable gentleman asked, where is the genius of America? What else but that genius has stimulated the people to reform that government, which woeful experience has proved to be totally inefficient? What has produced the unison of sentiments in the states on this subject? I expected that filial duty and affection would have impelled him to inquire for the genius of Virginia, that genius which so formerly resisted British tyranny, and in the language of manly intrepidity and fortitude said to that nation, thus far and no farther shall ye proceed. What has become of that genius which spoke that magnanimous language, that genius which produced the Federal Convention? Yonder she is, in a mournful attire, her hair is disheveled, distressed with grief and sorrow, supplicating our assistance against gorgons and fiends and hydras, which are all ready to devour her and carry desolation throughout her country. She bewails the decay of trade and neglect of agriculture, her farmers discouraged, her ship carpenters, blacksmiths, and all other tradesmen unemployed. She casts her eyes on these and deplores her inability to relieve them. She sees and laments that the profit of her commerce goes to foreign states. She further bewails that all she can raise by taxation is inadequate to her necessities. She sees religion die by her side, public faith prostituted, and private confidence lost between man and man. Are the hearts of her citizens so deaf to compassion that they will not go to her relief? If they are so infatuated, the dire consequences may be easily foreseen. Expostulations must be made for the defection of Virginia when Congress meets. They will inquire where she has lately discovered so much political wisdom, she that gave an immense tract of country to relieve the general distresses. Wherein consists her superiority to her friends of South Carolina and the respectable state of Massachusetts, who, to prevent a dissolution of the Union, adopted the Constitution and proposed such amendments as they thought necessary, placing confidence in the other states that they would accede to them? After making several other remarks, he concluded by declaring that in his opinion, we were about to determine whether we should become one of the United States or not. Eliot's Debates, page 642 and 644.